Shalom to all our friends in the United States and in additional countries. My name is Nitnאל Elishiv. I teach at the Bnei David institutions, and I'm also a writer, a small publisher, and a public speaker. I was born in the town of Binghamton in upstate New York in 1975. We made Aliyah way back in 1984 when I was almost 9 years old. And ever since I grew up a bit, I felt that I have a personal obligation to strengthen the bridge between Israeli Jews and the Jews of the diaspora. In recent years, I've had the chance to speak in a few Jewish communities and schools. Now, I believe that learning is always a two-way process. Even regarding the clear teacher-student relationship, Chazal say in Masechet Ta'anit and in other sources, they say, הרבה למדתי מרבותיי, ומחבריי יותר מרבותיי, ומתלמידיי יותר מכולן. Which means I've learned much from my teachers, even more so from my friends, and more than that, I've learned from my students. This saying appears in different versions. It's attributed to different rabbis. But when I began speaking in Jewish communities in the diaspora, it was important for me to relate that I'm not only coming to teach, although of course it is a wonderful zchut to disperse Torah Eretz Israel. Rather, I'm also coming to learn, to study. But I couldn't say this truly without thinking, my inner thoughts, without thinking what we, the Jews of Israel, really have to learn from our brothers and sisters from other countries. So one thing that occurred to me was the special place that the Jewish community has in the diaspora. Okay, in Israel, a shul is usually only a place of worship where people frequent it just to pray or study in. This as opposed to other countries in which the shul is actually a Jewish center, offering congregants a wide array of activities, social connections, and on a deeper level, it offers them identity. It's essential for the identity of a Jew to be a part of a Jewish community. And this also includes the important place that a rabbi holds in these congregations, serving as a spiritual leader. When we made Aliyah, almost no shul that I knew in Israel back then even had a rabbi. And since then, we've made a few steps forward, but we're still way behind in comparison to our brothers and sisters in Chutz La'aretz. So that's one thing that I was thinking about. And of course, the generosity of Jews of the world is a well-known fact, and every Jew in Israel has benefited much from donations made to Israel and to Israeli institutions, such as hospitals and educational institutions. So this is another thing that we should definitely learn from our brothers and sisters in Chutz La'aretz. We can also learn from the dedication of Jews to education and culture, the education of their own children, especially in recent years when the financial burden of Jewish education is becoming more difficult for many Jewish households. Yet, only recently did it become clear to me that the main thing that we ought to learn from the Jews of the world is actually something else, something that's really essential for us here in Israel. And one of the Jews who helped me define this to myself is Albert Bורlא. Albert Bורlא is the CEO of Pfizer. And recently he was asked by an Israeli journalist, he was asked the following question. She asked him, I wanted to know if the hotline that you had with Prime Minister Netanyahu is going on with Prime Minister Bennett. Now, she was asking this question because here in Israel, there's a very large divide between the right and the left, and many people are what we call here Bibistim. They totally follow Bibi. And everything, and a lot of other people are totally opposed. They're called here Ralabistim, Rak lo Bibi, anybody except for Bibi. So it's a divisive topic here in Israel. The Bibi, the pro Bibi, and the against Bibi, and the Bennett. So she was trying to drag him into this and asking Bורlא about his connections with the current prime minister as opposed to the previous prime minister, and he answered the following, and I'm quoting, I have developed very cordial relations with Bibi before and with Naftali now, and for me, I know that in Israel you have politics that sometimes divide you. For us, the Jews outside, there is just Israel. There is not one party or the other. We feel that Israel is always a safe harbor that we can always go to. So for us, Israel is very important. And whoever represents Israel, for me, it is very important to take the call immediately. Now, this approach, end of quote, this approach is lacking here in Israel. Although objectively, the differences between Jews and Israel have become more narrow over the years. If we compare our current times to even a few decades ago, and definitely if we think about the years of the establishment of Israel, so the machloket, the difference of opinions, it used to be wider, okay? And though it became more narrow, the subjective feeling of many Israelis is that we're drifting apart and becoming separate sectors. Some even use the term tribes, as if we're all just separate tribes who have nothing really in common. And this is happening on the political level, as well as regarding religious differences between different groups in Israel. And this is very, very dangerous. This partisanship, it's very dangerous because our very existence, I think every country's, but definitely ours in Israel, it depends on a certain degree of unity and inner civil peace. We live in a country in which everybody is needed to go to the army, to serve in the army and defend our country. We need people to believe in the system, at least enough to pay their taxes and to vote and to take part in the democratic processes of our country. And, this is our third shot. In baseball, you only have 3 strikes. And this is our third shot, so to speak, in being a Jewish state. In both of the previous attempts, our countries dissolved on their 8th decade. Okay? We're now in the midst of the 8th decade of our third Jewish state. And the question is, was it just a coincidence that it happened in the past after a bit more than 70 years? And I don't think so, because the rational explanation to the fact that Jewish states dissolved after 70, 80 years, I think it's that, in generations, 70, 80 years, it's 3 generations. Now, the first generation is the one that participated in the creation of the new state. They're the ones who make the sacrifices, and they know clearly how bad the alternative of not being independent actually is. And if it wasn't bad enough, all of our 2,000-year exile, we had the terrible Shoah, the Holocaust, at the end of it, to prove if anybody needed that proof, that the price of not being independent and not having our own Jewish state and our own defense, it can be simply a disaster, a real disaster. So the first generation, this is clear to them. Now, the second generation, they grow up when all of this was still in the air, in the atmosphere, in the public atmosphere. Their parents are the people who put their lives on the line to establish the state. And they were raised to see the Jewish state as a precious gift given to us by Hashem, and non-believers maybe by our own Mesirut Nefesh, but it's a precious gift. And people paid with their blood and their efforts to create this state. And this was clear in the second generation. But in the third generation, they're born into a situation in which the country is taken for granted. Most Israelis today, they were born in Israel. They don't know anything else except for Israel. Not all of them are conscious about the fact that for every Jew living in Israel, there's at least one Jew living out of Israel. And they are conscious of the disadvantages of statehood. And there are always disadvantages. It could be spiritual or material, large government, not smart policies. That always happens with statehood, okay? But the question is, if you have a wider view of the very existence, the miracle of being a state of Israel, and they not always have enough appreciation of the very existence of the state. And then you can let the differences become the main thing in your outlook. And I think that's what happened to us on the first and second attempts to have a Jewish state way back in history. Now, I'm an optimist and I'm a believer. I don't think we're going to Churban, Chas v'Shalom. We're going to, we believe in Medinat Israel, Lenetzach Netzachim, for all of our eternity. But we do have responsibility. okay? And I think that that's something that us here in Israel, we can learn from you who are living out of Israel. Because the Jews living out of Israel, for them it's easier to understand the meaning of the miracle that we call Medinat Israel. Now I recall when I was a little boy, I think I was in first grade, and my father and my brothers, they were at shul, okay? It was a Shabbos morning, and I was at home only with my mother, and the phone started ringing. Now, of course, we don't answer the phone on Shabbat, but it kept on ringing. Time and time again, it just kept on ringing for a very long while. And my father, Zal, he was not a very healthy man. My mother started becoming worried. She thought maybe there was some medical emergency, and if we're being called time and time again, then maybe something happened to him, and she asked to come and help. So after, I don't remember how many times it was, but it was a long time that the phone was ringing, she answered the phone. And you know who was on the line? Baruch Hashem, it wasn't from the hospital. It was the mother of a friend in my class. I studied at Hillel Academy, a Jewish day school in Binghamton. And it was the mother of one of my friends. And she said, "Oh, Mrs. Gottlieb, thank you for answering. My son, it's his birthday today, and we're having his birthday at McDonald's in the afternoon. And when he understood that Nitnאל wasn't coming, he was so sad. So he asked me to call you and invite Nitnאל to his birthday party." So it was Shabbos. Of course, we're not going to go drive to a birthday party. And it was at McDonald's, and not exactly kosher. So, of course, I didn't go. But I sometimes use this story to explain to people here in Israel that in my class, we were at a Jewish day school, and in the school, the boys had kippahs on, but not many families were very observant. And yet, we never looked at anybody else as less of a Jew because of differences in religious observance or other things or background. You know, we're all Jews, and some are more observant, some less, but we're all just Jews. And when we made Aliyah, I started learning as a child that here in Israel, this isn't always clear enough. I saw the differences between, first of all, on religious background, between the Datiim and the not Datiim, and the Charedim, and all kinds of groups. And these groups define people. People don't see the common participation, existence of us all as Jews. It's just, you know, he's a Dati and he's a not Dati and he's a Haredi, and that's just what you are. And the whole thing about, they called it Eidot. We were once in Bnei Akiva, we were told we're going to have an Eidah evening. Everybody should say from which Eidah he comes from, which, you know, if you're Ashkenazi or Sephardi or Yemenite. I didn't even know what that what that word meant. I remember I asked my parents, what Eidah are we? What is an Eidah? I had no idea. And even after I heard it, I said, you know, what's the big difference? What does it matter? Now, of course, there are certain differences. There are different traditions, and we should uphold the good traditions that come from every different Eidah. But it's not essential. It's not important. It's not as important as the fact that we're just all Jews. And of course, the political division between the right and the left, and like I said at the beginning, Bibi or not Bibi or Bennett or whoever will come, it doesn't matter that much. And for Jews across the world, there's only one Israel, and all Jews are equal partners in it. And while working hard to promote our views, I'm not naive. Of course, there are certain things that are important for us, and we're gonna struggle to promote certain things and values that we believe in. But we should always have a broader viewpoint. We should always look at the larger picture, the picture of Klal Yisrael and Achdut Yisrael. It's essential for our very existence. And Jews who are not born in Israel have an advantage in this perspective. And we have a lot to learn from that, as we learned from Albert Bורלא. Thank you very much.